Jai-Ho Park stood at the window of the space station, looking at the massive alien ships outside. His heart beat faster as he thought about the task ahead. Just yesterday, he had been working in his small office in Seoul. Now he was about to become Earth's voice in the galaxy. The message had come without warning. The Galactic Council wanted Earth to join them. They needed an answer in 24 hours. Earth's governments had scrambled to pick someone who could represent humanity. They chose Jai-Ho because he was different. While other diplomats took months to learn new systems, Jai-Ho could spot patterns in hours. "Are you ready?" asked Dae-Sung Kim, walking up behind him. The older diplomat had been Jai-Ho's teacher for years. Now he would watch as his student faced the biggest test of his life. "I think so," Jai-Ho said, straightening his simple black suit. He had chosen to wear Earth clothes instead of the flowing robes the aliens preferred. "Tell me again about the Council." 500 years of tradition, 2,000 member species, and a political system so complex that most races take decades to understand it. Dae-Sung shook his head. "They're giving us 1 day to learn enough to vote on our membership. Most think it's impossible." Jai-Ho smiled. "Most people aren't from Earth." A soft chime filled the room. Through the window, Jai-Ho watched as a new ship appeared. It was beautiful, like a crystal flower floating in space. This was the Council's personal vessel. "That's our signal," said Hae-Newell, walking into the room. The intelligence officer carried a tablet filled with all the information Earth had about the Council. It wasn't much. "They're ready for us." The 3 humans walked through the space station's clean white halls. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet. Other alien diplomats watched them pass, whispering to each other. Jai-Ho heard words like Deathworlder and primitive. The council chamber took Jai-Ho's breath away. The room was huge, with thousands of seats arranged in spinning rings. Each ring moved on its own, following rules Jai-Ho didn't understand yet. In the center, a group of alien leaders sat at a table shaped like a star. "Welcome, Earth delegation," said High Counselor Rian. The alien's voice was deep and smooth, coming from what looked like a shimmering cloud of light. "We are pleased you accepted our invitation so quickly." Jai-Ho bowed slightly. As he straightened, his eyes moved quickly around the room. He was already seeing patterns, the way the seats moved, the order the aliens spoke in, the colors they wore. Nothing was random. "We are honored to be here," Jai-Ho said. He used the simple words he had practiced. "Earth looks forward to learning from the Council's wisdom." A sound like quiet laughter came from some of the aliens. They thought he was being naive. But Jai-Ho kept watching, kept noting every detail. "Your species will have 1 day to learn our ways," said another council member. This one looked like a tall tree with eyes in its leaves. "Tomorrow, you must participate in the path of understanding. If you cannot follow our political processes, Earth's membership will be delayed for 50 years. Jai-Ho nodded. "We understand. May I ask questions as I observe today's session?" The council members looked at each other. This was not normal. Most new species just watched silently, trying to memorize everything. "You may," said High Counselor Rian. "But choose your questions wisely. Each one will be noted in the records." The session began. Jai-Ho sat with Hae-Newell and Dae-Sung in Earth's temporary seats. As the council discussed trade routes and border disputes, Jai-Ho's mind was racing. He saw how each vote followed a pattern, how each speech matched a mathematical formula, how even the movements of the seats followed strict rules. By lunch break, he had filled 3 pages with notes. The other aliens watched him write with growing interest. Nobody had ever taken notes like this before. "Jai-Ho," Dae-Sung whispered during a break. "What are you seeing?" Jai-Ho looked up from his notes. His eyes were bright with excitement. "It's beautiful," he said. "Their whole system. It's like a giant equation. And I think I'm starting to solve it." High Counselor Rian watched the humans from across the room. For the first time in centuries, the alien leader felt something new. Worry. Perhaps they had underestimated these Deathworlders. Perhaps they had made a mistake in giving them even one day to learn. But it was too late now. The game had begun, and Jeho Park was already several moves ahead. Jeho sat alone in the small room the council had given the Earth delegation. Papers covered every surface. He had been working for 6 hours straight since the first session ended. His fingers moved quickly as he drew lines between different notes. "You should eat something," Haynul said, walking in with a tray of Earth food. She stopped when she saw all the papers. "What is all this?" Jeho looked up, his eyes bright with lack of sleep but full of excitement. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a large chart he had drawn. "Every vote today followed this pattern. It's not random at all." Haynul put down the tray and looked closer. The chart showed circles within circles, with lines connecting different points. It looked like a strange mix of math and art. "See these numbers?" Jeho pointed to a sequence. They matched the way the council members voted on the trade laws, but they also match how they arranged their seats and even the colors of their clothes. "That's impossible," Haynul said, but she was already pulling out her tablet. As an intelligence officer, she had access to old council records. "Let me check something." While Haynul worked, Daesung came in. The older diplomat looked worried. "The other species are talking about you, Jeho. They don't like how many questions you asked today." "Good," Jeho said, surprising both his companions. "That means they noticed. Did you see how they changed their voting pattern after my third question?" Daesung shook his head. "They voted the same way they always do." "No." Jeho stood up and walked to a wall where he had drawn another diagram. "They tried to change their pattern to confuse me, but they couldn't change it completely because they have to follow their own rules. And that showed me exactly what those rules are." Haynul suddenly made a sound of surprise. "Jeho, I think you're right. Look at this." She turned her tablet around. On the screen were voting records from the past 50 years. "The patterns you found, they're in all of these records." Jeho smiled. "It's not just politics," he said. "Their whole society is built on mathematical principles. Every decision, every vote, every debate, it all follows specific formulas. They've turned politics into a science." "But why?" Daesung asked. "Why make it so complicated?" "Because it works," Jeho said. He picked up a paper covered in equations. "Think about it. No wars in their space for 500 years. No failed governments. No political chaos. They removed the uncertainty from politics." Haynul looked at the data again. "And they expect all new species to figure this out on their own. That's why it takes decades to join." "No," Jeho said quietly. "They expect us to fail. This whole thing, giving us one day, making us take the path of understanding tomorrow, it's a test they think we can't pass." He smiled. "But they didn't count on how humans think." "What do you mean?" Daesung asked. "Most species try to memorize everything they see. They look for rules to follow. But humans," Jeho gestured to his papers, "we look for patterns. We see connections. We adapt." Haynul was typing quickly on her tablet. "I'm running your equations against more historical data. Every match is perfect. You really figured it out." "Not everything," Jeho said, "but enough. Enough to understand their game." He walked to the window, looking out at the alien ships. "And tomorrow, we're going to play it." Just then, a soft chime filled the room. A message appeared on the wall screen. The path of understanding would begin in 8 hours. "You should rest," Daesung said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Jeho shook his head. "No time." "Haynul, I need more data." "Daesung, can you get me the records of today's trade dispute? There's something I need to check." As his companions left to help, Jeho looked at his charts one more time. The aliens had created a perfect system, a political machine that ran on pure logic. But they had forgotten one thing. Humans were very good at breaking machines. Outside the room, Hidden sensors watched everything. In their private chamber, the council members received reports about the humans' activities. High Counselor Rian read them with growing concern. No species had ever acted like this before. No species had ever looked for patterns instead of rules. For the first time in centuries, the perfect system faced something it had never planned for: human intuition. The council chamber was different this morning. The spinning rings of seats had stopped moving. All eyes were on the center, where Jai-Ho stood alone. The path of understanding was about to begin. Earth Representative. High Counselor Rian's voice filled the room. Are you prepared for the test? Jai-Ho looked calm in his black suit. Yes, High Counselor. Then we shall begin with a real problem. The air in the center of the room lit up with images. Two of our strongest member species are close to breaking trade agreements. The bright stars control important mining worlds. The deep runners have the ships to transport goods. They no longer wish to work together. Jai-Ho watched as more images appeared. They showed angry alien leaders and stopped trade ships. This was not a simple test. This was a real crisis. The Council has tried 3 times to solve this problem. Ryan continued. We have failed. Now it is your turn. Show us how Earth would handle this. In the watching crowd, Hei Newell gripped her tablet tightly. Daesung sat very still. They had helped Jai-Ho prepare all night, but this was bigger than they expected. Jai-Ho took a deep breath. Then he smiled. May I ask about the voting history of both species? A murmur went through the crowd. No one had ever asked for voting records during the Path of Understanding. You may, Ryan said slowly. Please show me how the bright stars voted on trade laws in the past 10 years, and how the deep runners voted on shiproad rights. The air filled with numbers and dates. Most aliens looked confused, but Jai-Ho's eyes moved quickly, following the patterns he had discovered. Interesting, he said. The bright stars always vote in groups of 3. The deep runners follow a 5-vote pattern, and when we add these patterns together, he drew something in the air with his finger. The council members leaned forward. They knew these patterns, but no one had ever connected them like this. High Counselor, Jai-Ho said, I would like to propose a solution. But first, I need to make 7 specific votes happen in a certain order. Now the room was completely silent. Species that had taken decades to learn council voting rules were watching a human try to arrange 7 votes at once. That is, Ryan seemed to struggle for words. That is not how the Path of Understanding usually works. Earth does things differently, Jai-Ho said simply. Will you allow it? The council members talked among themselves. Finally, Ryan spoke. We will allow it, but if you fail, Earth must wait 100 years to try again, not 50. Jai-Ho nodded. He had expected this. I understand. Please call for a vote on Trade Route Section 947. The vote began. Jai-Ho watched carefully as different species lit up their voting lights. At exactly the right moment, he raised his hand to vote too. The pattern of lights changed slightly, just as his equations had predicted. Now, he said, please call for a vote on mining rights in the outer sectors. One by one, Jai-Ho called for different votes. Each time, he voted at exactly the right moment. Each vote changed the pattern of lights in the room a little more. In the crowd, Hei Newell was checking her tablet. He's doing it, she whispered to Daesung. The pattern is following his calculations exactly. After the 6th vote, many council members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They could feel something changing in their perfect system, but they couldn't understand what. And now, Jai-Ho said, looking directly at High Counselor Ryan, please call for a vote on combined trade and transport licenses. Ryan hesitated for the first time in decades of leading the council. That vote has never been called for in that way. Because no one saw the pattern before, Jai-Ho said quietly. Please, High Counselor, call the vote. The room held its breath as Ryan slowly nodded. The final vote began. And as the lights flashed around the room, Even the oldest council members could see that something unprecedented was about to happen. The human hadn't just learned their system. He had mastered it. The final vote's lights spread across the council chamber like a wave. Jiho stood calmly in the center, watching as his plan came together. The room was completely silent. As the last vote was counted, numbers appeared in the air. They showed something that had never happened before. The Bright Stars and Deep Runners had voted the same way on a trade issue. Impossible, someone whispered. But it had happened. Jiho stepped forward. High Counselor, I can now show you how to solve the trade crisis. Ran's shimmering form seemed to flicker with surprise. Proceed. The 7 votes we just made created a new pattern, Jiho explained. He pointed to the numbers floating in the air. Look at how they line up. When the Bright Stars vote in groups of 3, and the Deep Runners in groups of 5, they create gaps in the voting record. He waved his hand, and the numbers rearranged themselves. These gaps are perfect spaces for new trade agreements. Agreements that follow both species' voting patterns. The council members were looking at their own screens now. They could see what the human was showing them. The patterns had always been there, but no one had thought to use them this way. If we write the new trade agreement to fit these gaps, Jiho continued, both species will have to vote for it. Their own voting patterns will make any other choice impossible. Hanul smiled from her seat in the crowd. She had helped Jiho find these patterns in the old records. Now everyone could see what they had discovered. But that's not all, Jiho said. He turned to face the representatives of the Bright Stars and Deep Runners. Your voting patterns show something else, something you've been hiding. The alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. You don't actually want to stop trading, Jiho said. Your pattern shows you've been planning to work together more closely. You just needed a way to do it that wouldn't break your traditional voting rules. The room burst into shocked whispers. The 2 species had been fighting in public, but their voting patterns told a different story. Is this true? Ryan asked the representatives. The Bright Stars leader spoke first. We couldn't find a way to make closer trade work with the old rules. Our people would not accept breaking tradition. But now, the Deep Runners leader added, looking at Jiho with all 4 eyes, this human has found a way that follows all the rules. Jiho nodded. The new trade agreement I'm proposing will let you work together more closely than ever before, and it will all happen through proper council votes. The council chamber was filled with excited talk now. Species that had watched council politics for centuries were seeing it change before their eyes. High Counselor, Jiho said, turning back to Rian. I believe this completes my path of understanding. Rian was silent for a long moment. When the alien leader spoke, there was a new tone in their voice. You have done more than complete it. You have changed it. Humans often change things, Jiho said simply. We can't help looking for new ways to solve problems. And that, Ryan said, is what worries many of us. Jiho smiled. Perhaps worry is good sometimes. It makes us think differently. As the council members talked excitedly about the new trade agreement, Hanul looked at her tablet one last time. The patterns Jiho had found were still there, glowing on her screen. But now she could see something else in the numbers. Something bigger. Jiho, she called out softly. You need to see this. He walked over to her, leaving the council to discuss his solution. When he saw what was on her tablet, his eyes widened. Are you sure? He whispered. Hanul nodded. The trade agreement patterns, they're just the beginning. There's something much bigger hidden in their political system. Jiho looked back at the council members, still busy with their excited discussions. None of them had realized yet that their perfect system had just shown its first crack. And through that crack, a human had seen the truth. The council's private meeting room was filled with worried voices. 20 of the oldest and most powerful council members sat around a table made of living crystal. They had been talking for hours about what happened earlier that day. It's not natural, said one member, their scales changing color with stress. No species can understand our system so quickly. High Counselor Rian floated at the head of the table, their light form dimmer than usual. Yet the human did exactly that. And there's more. Rian waved a tendril of light, showing recordings of Jaiho's actions. Look at his voting pattern again. The recordings played in the air above the table. They showed every vote Jaiho had made, every question he had asked. I see nothing wrong, said another council member. This one shaped like a tall crystal. His votes followed all our rules. Watch more closely, Rian said. Not just the votes. Watch everything else. As they watched again, one of the oldest members suddenly stood up. The rings. The seating rings were moving differently when he voted. Yes, Rian said quietly. He didn't just understand our voting patterns. He saw how they connect to the chamber itself. The rings, the lights, even the air temperature. He saw all of it as one system. Far away from this private meeting, Jaiho sat with Hainul in their room, looking at her latest discoveries. The whole council chamber is like a giant computer, Hainul explained, showing him more data on her tablet. Every vote changes things we can't even see. And you? She looked at Jaiho with wide eyes. You were programming it. Jaiho nodded. I didn't realize at first, but when I saw how the trade agreement votes changed the ring movements, I understood. Their whole political system is built on quantum mathematics. It's beautiful. Back in the private meeting room, the council members were reaching the same conclusion. He's accessing quantum voting patterns that took us centuries to build, one member said, their voice shaking. If humans can do this in one day, then they might find the greater pattern, another finished. The room went completely silent. The greater pattern was the council's biggest secret. It was the mathematical foundation of their entire civilization. No species had ever found it before they were ready. We must stop this, said the crystal member. Call for a new vote. Remove Earth from consideration. We can't, Rian said. The humans' trade agreement votes locked us into a pattern. Any vote to remove Earth now would break 500 years of voting rules. He trapped us, the scaled member whispered, using our own system. Meanwhile, Hanul was showing Jaiho something new on her tablet. Look at these old records, she said. Every 500 years, the council's voting patterns reset. They're due for another reset soon. Jaiho studied the numbers. This is it, he said softly. This is what they're really afraid of. The reset lets them change all the rules. And it's coming up in less than a month. Should we tell them we know? Hainul asked. Jaiho shook his head. Not yet. First, we need to understand why they keep this secret. Why are they so afraid of change? In the council meeting room, Rian was asking a different question. Should we be afraid of humans, or should we learn from them? Learn from Deathworlders? Several members asked in shock. Yes, Rian said. Think about it. Our system has worked perfectly for 500 years. But maybe, the light being paused, maybe perfect isn't always good. What do you mean? Asked the crystal member. The human found patterns we didn't even know were there. He saw connections we never imagined. Perhaps, Rian's light brightened slightly. Perhaps our perfect system needs some human chaos. The other council members looked at each other in worry. Their perfect, mathematical political system had never faced anything like humans before, and now they had to decide. Fight against this new force, or embrace it. As night fell on the space station, both sides prepared for what would come next. The council members planned their next moves, and in their small room, Jaiho and Hainul kept working, unraveling more patterns in the quantum mathematics that ran the galaxy. The real test was about to begin. The next morning, Jaiho walked into the council chamber alone. This time, all the seats were empty. Only the 20 highest council members waited in the center, with High Counselor Rian floating above them. Jaiho Park of Earth, Rian's voice was formal and cold. You have been called to answer serious questions. Jaiho bowed slightly. I am happy to answer anything you ask, High Counselor. Are you? The Crystal Council member moved forward. Then tell us how you really learned our system. What scanning devices did you use? What secrets did you steal? Jaiho smiled calmly. I used no devices. I stole no secrets. I simply watched and learned. Impossible. The scaled member's colors flashed angrily. No one can understand quantum political patterns so quickly. Would you like me to prove it? Jaiho asked quietly. The council members looked at each other. Rion's light flickered with interest. How would you do this? Let me predict what will happen in this room in the next hour, Jaiho said. Every vote, every movement, every decision. I'll write them down now, and you can see if I'm right. A murmur went through the council members. This was dangerous. If the human really understood their system this well. We accept, Ryan said before anyone could object. Write your predictions. Jaiho took out a small paper notebook, something that made several council members laugh. Such primitive technology. He wrote quickly for several minutes, then handed the notebook to Ryan. Now, Jaiho said, ask your questions. Follow your normal protocols. We'll see if I understand your system as well as I claim. The crystal member spoke first. How did you know about the ring movements in the chamber? The rings move in patterns matching your quantum voting sequences. Jaiho explained. It's beautiful, actually. Each ring represents a different political faction. When they move together, they show all possible voting outcomes. As he spoke, the rings above them shifted exactly as he had described. Several council members looked up in surprise. And the trade agreement? Asked another member. How did you know it would work? Because your system is based on harmony, Jaiho said. Every vote must balance with all other votes. When I saw the patterns of the bright stars and deep runners, I could see they were already in harmony. They just needed someone to show them how. The room's lights changed color, following the ancient rules of council discussions. Jaiho smiled as each change matched what he had written. He's reading from hidden data. The scaled member insisted. This must be some Earth trick. Would you like me to predict your next words? Jaiho asked politely. Your voting pattern shows you always speak 3 times in discussions like this. Your next statement will be about Earth's technology level, and your final one will be a call for caution. The scaled member's mouth opened, then closed. They had been about to speak about Earth's primitive technology. Ryan looked at Jaiho's notebook again. Every prediction was coming true. The room's temperature changes, the movement of council members, even the order of questions, all exactly as written. But how? The crystal member asked. How can you know all this? Because I'm human, Jaiho said simply. We're good at seeing patterns, and your system, for all its quantum complexity, is still just patterns. Beautiful, mathematical patterns that work together perfectly. He walked to the center of the room. But there's something else, something you're all worried about. Would you like me to tell you what I know about the 500-year reset? The chamber went completely silent. In that moment, every council member realized the same thing. This human hadn't just learned their system. He had seen through it completely. Perhaps, Ryan said slowly, their light brightening, it is time for us to have a different kind of discussion. Jaiho nodded. Yes, a discussion about change, about mixing human chaos with alien order, about making something new. The council members looked at each other. Their perfect system had worked for 5 centuries. But now they had to decide. Hold on to the old patterns or embrace something new. And Jaiho Park, the human who had mastered their system in a day, waited calmly for their answer. Haenul and Daesung joined Jaiho in the council chamber. The 3 humans stood together as Jaiho prepared to explain what he had learned about the alien political system. Your system is perfect, Jaiho began, but that's its biggest weakness. How can perfection be a weakness? Asked the Crystal Council member. Jaiho walked to the center of the room. Above him, the great rings turned slowly. May I show you something? Haenul, Please share the data. Newell stepped forward with her tablet. Numbers and patterns filled the air around them. These are voting records from the past 500 years, she explained. Look at how they repeat. Of course they repeat, said the scaled member. That's how we maintain order. Yes, Jaiho said. But it also means your system can't handle new things. It can't grow. Every 500 years, you have to reset everything, because the patterns become too rigid. Ryan's light flickered thoughtfully. And you believe humans have a better way? Not better, Jaiho said. Different. Look at how humans make decisions. He waved his hand, and new patterns appeared in the air. We mix logic and instinct. We follow patterns, but we also break them when needed. That's chaos, several council members said at once. No, Dae-sung stepped forward. It's adaptation. It's how we survived on Earth. Our world taught us to be flexible. Jaiho nodded. Your system is like a perfect crystal. Beautiful, but it can't change shape. Human thinking is like water. We flow around obstacles. We find new paths. The council members watched as Jaiho showed them more patterns. He explained how human decisions looked random, but actually followed hidden rules. How Earth's many cultures had learned to work together by being flexible. And that's why I could understand your system so quickly, Jaiho said. Humans are always looking for patterns, but we don't get stuck in them. We see how they can change. This is dangerous talk, the crystal member warned. Our system has kept peace for 500 years. But how many species have you turned away? Newell asked. How many couldn't fit into your perfect patterns? The council chamber was quiet. Everyone knew the answer. Hundreds of species had failed to join because they couldn't understand the system. There's more, Jaiho said softly. Your 500-year reset is coming soon. You're worried about it. Every reset is harder than the last, isn't it? Ryan's light dimmed slightly. How did you know? The patterns show it, Jaiho said. Each reset takes longer. The system becomes more rigid. Eventually, he paused. Eventually, it won't be able to reset at all. The council members looked worried now. This was their greatest fear, one they had never shared with any other species. But there's a solution, Jaiho said. He pressed some buttons on Newell's tablet. New patterns appeared, mixing the strict council rules with flowing human-style decisions. We can help you make the system flexible, keep the stability you love, but add the ability to change when needed. Is such a thing possible? Ryan asked. Jaiho smiled. It's already happening. Look at the trade agreement I helped create. It follows all your rules, but it also allows for change. It's a small example of what we could do together. The council members watched as Jaiho showed them more examples. Ways to keep their quantum voting system, but make it adaptable. Ways to help more species join the council. This is why Earth should join the council, Dae-sung said. Not because we mastered your system, but because we can help it grow. And if we refuse? The scaled member asked. Then you'll face the next reset alone, Jaiho said quietly, and maybe the one after that. But eventually, the crystal will become too rigid. And then, he didn't need to finish. They all understood. Ryan floated down until they were at Jaiho's eye level. You offer us change. I offer you survival, Jaiho corrected. Change is just how we get there. The council chamber was silent as the members considered his words. The perfect system they had built over centuries stood at a crossroads. And a human from Earth was showing them a new path forward. 3 days had passed since Jaiho's revelation about the council's system. The great chamber was full again, but this time it was different. The spinning rings moved in new patterns, mixing the old mathematical rules with new flowing changes. The council has made its decision, Ryan announced, their light form brighter than ever. We have voted on Earth's membership and the proposed changes to our political system. Jaiho stood with Newell and Dae-sung, waiting calmly. Behind them, representatives from every council species watched with interest. The room felt alive with energy. "Show us the vote," the crystal member said. The air filled with numbers and patterns, but these were unlike any voting patterns the council had seen before. They flowed and changed, beautiful and strange at the same time. "The vote is unanimous," Ryan said. "Earth will join the council." And they paused. "We accept the need for change." A sound of surprise filled the room. The council had never voted unanimously on anything this important before. "Jaiho Park," Ryan continued, "you will help us design the new system. We want to combine our quantum mathematics with human adaptability." Jaiho bowed. "I would be honored, but I have a request." "Speak." "Let other species help too," Jaiho said. "Many of them have ideas that could make the system better. They were just afraid to suggest changes before." The scaled members' colors shifted with surprise. "You would share this power." "It's not about power," Hainul said. "It's about making things better together." Daesung stepped forward. "Earth learned long ago that the best solutions come from many different viewpoints." Ryan's light sparkled with what seemed like amusement. "You continue to surprise us, humans." "Very well. We will create a special committee. Representatives from all species can help design the new system." "But how will it work?" someone called from the crowd. "How can we mix quantum mathematics with human chaos?" Jaiho walked to the center of the chamber. "Let me show you," he said. He took out his notebook and Hainul's tablet. "We start with your basic voting patterns, but we add flexibility points." Above him, the rings began to move in a new way. The patterns stayed stable, but they could shift and change when needed. "See how the patterns stay strong, but can adapt," Jaiho explained. "Like a tree that bends in the wind but doesn't break." The council members watched in amazement as Jaiho showed them more examples. He demonstrated how the new system could handle unexpected problems without needing a reset. "And the 500-year reset?" the crystal member asked. "Won't be needed anymore," Jaiho said. "The system will adjust naturally, little by little. No more big, dangerous resets." Ryan floated down to the center. "You have done more than master our system, Jaiho Park. You have shown us how to make it truly perfect, by making it imperfect." The chamber filled with soft laughter at this idea. The council members were beginning to understand the strange wisdom of human thinking. "We will need time to implement these changes," Ryan said. "The next few months will be difficult." "Change is always difficult," Daesung said. "But staying the same can be even harder." As the council members began discussing the details of the new system, Hainul showed Jaiho something on her tablet. "Look," she said excitedly. "The voting patterns are already starting to flow more naturally. The system is learning to adapt." Jaiho smiled as he watched the patterns change. In just a few days, the council had gone from fearing human chaos to embracing it. And this was just the beginning. "What happens next?" asked the scaled member, their colors showing curiosity instead of fear now. "Next," Jaiho said, "we learn from each other. You teach us about quantum mathematics and perfect patterns. We teach you about adaptation and change. And together," he looked up at the flowing patterns above them, "together we make something new, something that has never existed before in the galaxy." The council chamber hummed with excitement. The perfect system was becoming something more perfect, by becoming less perfect, and it had taken a human to show them the way. 1 month had passed since the council accepted Earth's membership. The great council chamber looked different now. The spinning rings still moved in their patterns, but they flowed like water, beautiful and ever-changing. Jaiho stood at his new desk, looking at the latest voting results. Next to him, Hainul was showing a group of alien representatives how to read the new patterns. "See how the lines flow," she explained. "When a problem comes up, the pattern bends around it instead of breaking." The aliens watched in wonder. Some of them were from species that had failed to join the council before. Now they were learning the new system easily. "Jaiho," Daesung called from across the room. High Counselor Rion wants to show you something. Jai-Ho walked to the center of the chamber. Rion's light form was brighter than ever, showing excitement. Look at these numbers, Rion said, displaying new data in the air. In just 1 month, we've accepted 15 new member species, and trade across the galaxy has increased by 30%. The flexible system is working better than we hoped, Jai-Ho said, smiling. Better than any of us imagined, the crystal member added. They had become one of the strongest supporters of the new system. Even species we thought could never work together are finding ways to cooperate. The scaled member, their colors now showing calm blues and greens, pointed to another set of numbers. And look at the stability readings. The quantum patterns are actually stronger now that they can adapt. Like a flexible bridge that stands up to storms better than a rigid one, Jai-Ho explained. Suddenly, a new alert appeared in the air. A trade dispute had broken out in a distant part of the galaxy. In the old system, this would have caused panic and needed many emergency votes. But now, everyone watched calmly as the new system responded. The voting patterns shifted smoothly, creating new paths for agreement. Within minutes, the dispute was settling itself. It's beautiful, Haynul said, watching the patterns flow. The system is solving problems before they become serious. Because it learns and adapts, Rion said. Like humans do. Jai-Ho looked around the chamber. Aliens of all kinds work together now, sharing ideas and solving problems. The fear and stiffness of the old council was gone. Minister Du Young sent a message, Dae Sung said, walking over with his tablet. Earth's government is very pleased. They want to know if we need more human representatives here. Tell them yes, Jai-Ho said. But not just humans. Every species has something to teach us. The more different viewpoints we have, the stronger we become. Rion floated closer. You were right, Jai-Ho Park. The perfect system wasn't perfect at all. It needed to be more human. Not just human, Jai-Ho corrected. It needed to be more alive. Humans just showed you how to take the first step. The great rings above them turned in their endless dance, but now they moved like waves in an ocean, like leaves in the wind. The quantum mathematics was still there, still keeping everything stable, but now it had room to grow and change. The 500-year reset would have been due next week, the crystal member said. But now we'll never need it. Haynul finished. The system resets itself a little bit every day, growing stronger each time. Jai-Ho walked to the window, looking out at the ships coming and going from the station. More species arrived every day to join the council. The galaxy was changing, becoming more connected, more alive. What's next? Dae Sung asked, joining him at the window. Jai-Ho smiled. Next, we keep learning. From each other, from our mistakes, from our successes. The system will keep growing, keep changing. And we'll grow with it. Above them, the patterns flowed and danced, mathematical perfection and human chaos working together in harmony. The council had become something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. And it had all started because one human had looked at the perfect system and seen not just what it was, but what it could become. The new era had begun.